Welcome to Fundamentals of Qualitative Research Methods. My name is Leslie Curry. I'm a senior research scientist at the Yale School of Public Health, a co-director at the Robert Wood Johnson Clinical Scholars Program at the Yale School of Medicine, and a lecturer at Yale College. And in all these various roles, I have the opportunity to teach and mentor students in using qualitative research methods, as well as collaborate across a number of multidisciplinary teams across the university. I'd like to give you an overview of the modules in this series. And to start with, the goal of this series is to enhance our capacity to conceptualize, design, and conduct qualitative research in the health sciences. And by health sciences, I mean clinical and health services research, implementation science, across a host of disciplines and specialties. There are 6 modules in this series. The first is, what is qualitative research? The second moves us to developing a qualitative research question, which is actually not as easy as it might sound. The third module addresses one of the major qualitative study designs, the use of in-depth interviews. The fourth module reviews a second major qualitative study design, the use of focus groups. The fifth module provides an overview of qualitative data analysis, the principles and practices of analyzing qualitative data. And the last module reviews the principles of scientific rigor in qualitative research. And so to begin with the first module, what is qualitative research? I want to invite you to take a moment to reflect on this fundamental premise. Really appreciating this assumption is necessary in order to maximize the use of qualitative methods in the health sciences. And so this is a quote attributed to Albert Einstein, who reflected that not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So if you pause and you think of a circumstance or an issue or a phenomenon in your own clinical practice or area of research, I invite you to contemplate a phenomenon that perhaps can't have a number assigned to it. If we're interested, for instance, in end-of-life care for terminally ill patients, you might think about preferences for services at the end of life. This may be something that was very difficult to put a number on. And so this assumption helps us appreciate the potential power of qualitative methods. So as an example, we might be interested in the care of patients with epilepsy. This first question is a quantitative question. What proportion of people with epilepsy stop taking their medications for 3 consecutive days in a 6-month period? This is something that we can quantify, put a number on. It can be very important in an overall question in looking at adherence to medication regimes in this patient group. A different question related to the same phenomenon might be, how does medication shape the lives of people with epilepsy? And so looking in a very different perspective for the patient experience, whether or not they feel mastery or self-efficacy in trying to adhere to complex medication regimes. So let's move to a definition. What is qualitative research? There are many definitions. This is one that we feel represents the critical elements of a qualitative research approach. And so we'll work through this definition together for a minute. Qualitative research is a strategy for the systematic collection, organization, and interpretation of textual information. So let's break this down into parts. We use the word strategy to connote the fact that a qualitative research question is thoughtful, deliberate, conceived of with a broader attention to context and to the relative strengths and limitations of a qualitative method, so it's strategic in its nature. It's systematic. It's not something that's loosely formed, ad hoc. It rather relies on a set of established, well-defined, articulated methodologies for the collecting, organizing, and analyzing of qualitative data. Qualitative research broadly uses inductive approaches, so working from the ground up, to generate novel insights into phenomena that are difficult to measure quantitatively. such as preferences for end-of-life care or issues of self-efficacy and mastery in self-care management. So qualitative methods can do a couple of things, two broad buckets, the first being generating a comprehensive description of processes, mechanisms, or settings. So thinking about processes of implementing clinical care, mechanisms, how one intervention may achieve a particular outcome, or settings, what is it like to care for patients and their families in a particular environment. These methods can also characterize participant perspectives and their experiences in great depth. Here we might think about individual health behaviors, individual experiences of care in a particular clinic setting. So I want to spend a few minutes on this figure. Here in this Venn diagram, we see on in one circle qualitative, in the other circle quantitative. We have arrows pointing to the center of the intersection of these circles in order to convey the really, I think, very critical notion that quantitative and qualitative methods really exist along a continuum of measurement, that each has its respective strengths and limitations, and that when we draw upon those in order to minimize the limitations in a particular method and maximize its assets, we can use mixed methods, which is the combining of qualitative and quantitative methods. So let's just populate one of these circles, the qualitative methods circle. So I mentioned qualitative methods in terms of approach is inductive in nature. So we're not coming to a research question with any a priori hypotheses that we're testing. We're rather working from the ground up. Qualitative research in terms of its goal is to achieve depth of understanding. So we're looking in a very deep way to unpack critical facets of a given phenomenon. We may be interested in generating hypotheses that can then go on and be tested in a quantitative study. Qualitative work occurs in a natural setting. It's not experimental, it's not controlled, it doesn't happen in a lab. Rather, we're often interested in features of the natural environment that may help us understand the question of interest. Sampling approaches in qualitative methods are purposeful in nature. So we'll just take a moment here to think together about what purposeful means. This is in contrast to random sampling. So rather than, for instance, we're in an emergency department setting and we are, rather than recruit every fifth patient who comes through the doors of the emergency department, a purposeful sampling design would choose individual patients who come through the door that share a given characteristic. So for instance, if we're interested in the care of patients who are homeless in the emergency department setting, we'd want to be very purposeful in that design, in choosing only those who have the experience that we're interested in studying. Data collection in qualitative methods is done through interview guides and various kinds of observation tools. These are much more open-ended than structured surveys or instrumentation we use in our quantitative studies. And lastly, data analysis is iterative. It's a process of interpreting data, going out to the field, collecting data, interpreting that, going back out to the field, collecting data, and interpreting that. This is in contrast to our approaches in, for instance, a structured survey on quantitative methods where we collect all of the data and then begin our analysis only at that point. And so you can see how the principles of qualitative methods line up with the quantitative methods. And I think very important to consider that these are simply a range of tools, all designed to measure different aspects of phenomena of interest. So what are the products of qualitative research? What can we make of this? Well, there are at least four ways to think about what we generate through qualitative methods. The first product is recurrent themes or hypotheses. We're going to look at an example of that in a moment. The second kind of product might be a survey instrument measure, so using a qualitative exploratory phase in order to design a survey to measure something that hasn't been measured previously. Taxonomies, these are classification systems in order to identify essential properties of a particular construct. And conceptual models or theories, these are frameworks for helping us understand a particular phenomenon. These are 4 major products of qualitative research. The most common we see in the health sciences are recurrent themes or hypotheses. So themes are unifying concepts or statements, and they can do a couple of things. The first is to help us identify and characterize a number of aspects of healthcare and health. The first can be patterns of behaviors. We might look at how patterns recur in a certain patient population or in a certain environment. They can help us understand group interactions and individual perceptions. Themes also can help us develop testable hypotheses. They can do this by helping identify the salient factors, what matters in a given, to a given question, what matters, say, from a patient's perspective. And they can help inform predictions about relationships, how 2 aspects or dimensions of a given question might relate to one another. So let's look at an example. This is a paper written by a former clinical scholar at the Robert Wood Johnson program, Lisa Diamond. And Lisa was very interested in the use of interpreters by resident physicians in caring for patients who have limited English proficiency. And so Lisa conducted a qualitative study. She interviewed residents at 2 academic medical centers with excellent interpreter services on site. And she talked with the residents to understand their experience in using interpreters in these environments in order to care for these patients. This is an excerpt from the published paper, which is in the Journal of General Internal Medicine. And this is to give you an example of what a thematic output looks like. This theme is in bold. This is one of the 5 recurrent themes in the paper. And the primary theme here, the emphasis, is to indicate that resident physicians recognize that they underuse professional interpreters and described this phenomenon as, quote, getting by. Sometimes we use the language of participants in order to represent the key element, the most pertinent essence of a given theme. And then what follows is several sentences that describe that theme in greater depth, and then followed by an illustrative quote. So using the words of participants in order to support and illustrate the higher level theme. And just to read this together, this quote from a resident said that, "I know that when people are very pushed for time, they may or may not call an interpreter. They may just get by on the few words they know in different languages for like pain and take a deep breath and just fumble through. You probably get a pretty bad history and maybe not a great physical exam either." It's an example of thematic output. So let's conclude with a few thoughts. First, qualitative methods can provide unique contributions to health services and clinical research. We've talked through briefly some examples in this introductory segment. Second, there are rigorous and widely accepted procedures for study design, sampling, data collection, and data analysis in qualitative research. And in the remaining 5 modules in this series, we'll talk more about primary methodologies, interviews and focus groups, and data analysis in that context. Thank you.